Hi, it's Wednesday, February 18th, 2026. You're tuned into Why America. I'm your lawyer friend, Leeja Miller. Today, we're diving into the Epstein files. What's the current status of the federal disclosure of the upwards of 6 million plus documents? What is or isn't in them? But also, what this entire situation reveals about not only the nefarious actions of the rich and famous, but also about our entire global world order and how it functions to our detriment. Before we dive in, let me be clear what I'm not interested in doing. I am not interested in conjecture about who is or isn't behind the redacted black boxes in these files. I'm not interested in spreading conspiracy theories. I'm not interested in fear-mongering or instilling paranoia in people. I think because of the incredible lack of transparency in these files, it's led the public at large to start wildly speculating about things that may or may not be true. And I honestly think that the wildest accusations that people are eating babies, for example, take away from the fundamental truths about our society that are very, very real and laid bare in these files. The way our system is set up to let the greediest, most disgusting among us get away with unconscionable actions, whether or not they include eating babies, and how the system works to hold them in their positions of power. That's what matters. No smoking gun piece of evidence is needed to get the larger picture of what the Epstein files reveal about our world. And so today I'm interested in those takeaways. We'll discuss how we got here and the basics of what's in the files, but then also the big takeaways that I hope everyone gets from these files and what we can actually do about it. And if you watch all of my videos, but you're somehow not subscribed yet, could you do me a favor and just hit that subscribe button? It really helps the channel. Thank you so much. Scams, identity theft. It all starts with your personal data being exposed online, on people search sites, data broker databases, shady directories. It's all out there, available to anyone who wants to access your information for nefarious purposes or to spam your inbox for all eternity. The information out there about you could be your address, your phone number, your social security number, your mom's name, your grandma's name. It's all being bought and sold by shady actors online, usually because of major data breaches that are becoming more common every year. Also, did you know some of the people buying up all your information include health insurance companies that can then use that info to raise your rates? I hate it. And some of these people profile sites compile inaccurate information from across the web, information that your potential future employers could see, risking future jobs based on inaccurate information. It's a mess. It should be regulated out of existence, but alas, of course, our lawmakers have done very little to protect us. My partner on today's video, 𝗓𝗓𝗏, can help. 𝗓𝗓𝗏 tracks down and removes your personal data from hundreds of sites, including online directories, people search sites, and even commercial databases. Here's how it works. You create an account and give 𝗓𝗓𝗏 some bare minimum personal info so they can identify you, and then they automatically get to work removing your information from across the web. And if you come across your information on some obscure site somewhere, just send it to 𝗓𝗓𝗏 and they'll get your information removed ASAP. And 𝗓𝗓𝗏 checks their work. Some sites will add you back into their listings even after you've been removed, but 𝗓𝗓𝗏 will be there to make sure that that doesn't happen. And 𝗓𝗓𝗏 offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try them out risk-free. I think you'll enjoy the peace of mind that comes from knowing your personal information is being actively protected. Take your personal data back with 𝗓𝗓𝗏. Go to 𝗓𝗓𝗏𝗏.com/Leeja and use code Leeja to get 60% off an annual plan today. That's 𝗓𝗓𝗏𝗏.com/Leeja. Use code Leeja for 60% off an annual plan. Thanks, 𝗓𝗓𝗏. Here's a quick reminder of how we got here and the latest developments in the Epstein files for those of you who, like me, have been kind of passively watching but avoiding getting in too deep. And yes, I'm going to briefly go all the way back because Epstein's life reveals patterns that repeat themselves over and over for the rich and powerful of the world. PBS News put together a helpful timeline that I've linked in the sources, which are linked in the description as always. Okay, so Epstein is this well-connected finance bro of the 80s and 90s who manages to charm his way into the inner circles of some of the richest and most powerful people on the planet, despite being incredibly underqualified. One of them is, of course, our current president, Donald J. Trump. He's got a number of mansions, including a big one in Manhattan and another in Palm Beach, Florida. In 2005, in Palm Beach, the family of a 14-year-old girl filed a police report saying Epstein abused their daughter. Multiple other underage girls come forward alleging similar stories, that they were hired to give massages. Palm Beach police officials initially sign off on charging Epstein with a bunch of counts of sex with minors, but then the Florida state attorney, Barry Krischer, makes the unusual choice to send the case to a grand jury instead, which then hands down a single count of soliciting prostitution, prompting pushback that leads to a federal investigation. Another year after that, and federal prosecutors have finally prepared an indictment against Epstein for his abuse of minors, but that's paused as Epstein's lawyers, some of the best in the country because Epstein is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, negotiate with then U.S. Attorney in Miami, Alexander Acosta, saying his accusers are unreliable and asking for a plea deal to avoid federal prosecution. prosecution. In a secret deal, 𝗂𝗧𝗛 agrees not to prosecute Epstein for federal sex crimes. Instead, Epstein pleads guilty to state charges, 1 count of soliciting prostitution and 1 count of soliciting prostitution from a minor. He gets 18 months in jail, ultimately only serves 13 of them, and participates in a work release program during that jail time so he can continue enriching himself while in prison, and is allowed to leave the prison for 12 hours every day. Epstein's numerous accusers mount legal challenges trying to void his federal non-prosecution agreement, and many file civil lawsuits against him for abuse because the criminal prosecutions never happen. Flash forward to 2018. Trump is president, and Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney who negotiated the Epstein non-prosecution agreement, is now Trump's labor secretary. A series of articles from the Miami Herald about Acosta's role in the case increases public interest in Epstein. By 2019, New York prosecutors arrest Epstein on new sex trafficking charges after they determine that they are not bound by the earlier Florida non-prosecution agreement. Epstein is arrested on July 6, 2019, and on July 10, 2019, Epstein is dead by an apparent, though disputed, suicide in his jail cell. The next year, 2020, Epstein's main co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, is charged with sex crimes. She's convicted at the end of 2021, and in 2022, she's sentenced to 20 years in prison for her crimes. To this day, she is the only person who's been prosecuted related to Epstein's decades-long abuse and trafficking crimes. On the campaign trail in 2024, Trump promised he would release the Epstein files, likely in a bid to win favor and votes from the large portion of his base who never lost interest in the Epstein files, and yet somehow still supported him, even though he's known to have been close friends with Epstein during the height of his power and alleged crimes. But whatever. Then, after months of waffling, Congress passes the Epstein Files Transparency Act in November last year, forcing the DOJ to release its investigative files to the public. The act gives the DOJ 30 days. In December, the DOJ releases a small fraction of the troves of documents that make up the so-called Epstein files, claiming that they need more time to review the records before releasing more. Then, a little over 2 weeks ago, after mounting public pressure and pressure from Congress, the DOJ finally released over 3 million pages of documents, plus 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. There are reportedly still some 3 million or so pages of documents that have not been released. The way the DOJ released these documents was incredibly haphazard, disorganized, and confusing, and that was likely partially due to incompetence and also partially on purpose. What was meant to increase transparency has mainly just created more questions and distrust amongst the public. Many of the documents are duplicates of other documents with inconsistent redactions throughout. The names of the powerful people in Epstein's circle have been in some cases redacted, while the names and information about his victims went unredacted. The release is made up of 12 datasets containing different general categories of evidence, including FBI interview summaries, police reports, emails, DOJ correspondence regarding investigations, financial ledgers, flight logs, and more. It's a mess, and it's not easy to parse through, which is entirely on purpose. It leaves journalists, reporters, and the public at large to actually do the work of putting the pieces together and figuring out what evidence actually exists within the trove of documents, something the DOJ was supposed to have done. And yet here we sit with only one person ever having been prosecuted for Epstein's crimes. So the public is rightfully and understandably scouring the documents to try to find evidence themselves because they do not trust the DOJ or law enforcement to do anything, and they also don't trust Congress or the mainstream media, which are both increasingly influenced by the very multimillionaires and billionaires who ran in Jeffrey Epstein's circle for years, despite everyone knowing that he actively abused underage girls, despite the fact that he was on the child sex offender registry and literally served jail time for abusing a minor. The Verge did a really great piece on Friday called "What's in the Epstein Files? For TikTokers, a Content Goldmine," profiling the way this lack of transparency, profundity of evidence, and distrust of major societal institutions is leading to wild speculation and online citizen investigations from people on TikTok and other corners of the internet, some of whom are well-intentioned, many of whom are trying to make a quick buck by attempting to find the wildest documents or make connections between things in the files and powerful people that are speculative at best and at worst re-traumatizing to many of Epstein's victims and others who may be completely unrelated to the Epstein case. The Verge chronicles one such incident, quote, "Some creators have tried to identify a redacted image of a young girl they believe is the daughter of a high-profile couple in Epstein's orbit. After finding the now adult woman they speculate once sat on Epstein's lap, sleuths have began posting unsolicited comments on her social media, effectively dragging a private citizen into a viral investigation without evidence or consent. And that's just one example of many. But as the Verge article points out, it makes sense that this level of citizen investigation would be happening, and the incentive to exploit the Epstein files for attention and profit is very high, despite the fact that the DOJ has known since at least 2006 that Epstein was a child sexual predator and had tons of the richest, most powerful people on the planet in his orbit. It has done shockingly little to investigate the numerous accusations against Epstein and his network brought by the girls and women who were victims of abuse. And this happened not just under Trump's watch, but under the watch of every presidential administration since George W. Bush, not to mention, of course, Bill Clinton's close relationship with Epstein during and after his presidency. It's completely irrational for people who have lost faith in the justice system to ever deliver actual justice for the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, especially under the current administration, which has done absolutely nothing but drag its feet and attempt to thwart any possible level of transparency, not to mention undermine every institution and the rule of law in this country in numerous other ways. On top of the lack of faith in the DOJ and the government, the public at large has dramatically little trust in traditional news media to do the actual work to hold powerful people accountable. According to the Verge article, quote, Epstein reportedly left a severed cat's head and a bullet on the doorstep of Vanity Fair's editor-in-chief in the early 2000s to scare off coverage of his abuse. At ABC News, anchor Amy Robach was recorded in 2019 saying the network had quashed her earlier Epstein investigation. ABC claimed that there was not sufficient corroboration for broadcast, and critics have argued that initial coverage by the New York Times downplayed the scope of Epstein's network and the systemic failures that enabled him. So, when Miami Herald reporter Julie K. Brown first approached former Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Reiter in 2017 about his Epstein investigation, he was unresponsive. It had been 12 years since he'd opened the case. He was convinced that a lot of media had squashed the story, and he was fed up, she told WNYC. Somebody's going to call your publisher, and the next thing you know, you are going to be assigned to the obituaries department, she said she recalled him saying. That being said, that same Miami Herald reporter, Julie Brown, is credited with bringing to light that secret non-prosecution agreement in 2018 and bringing renewed interest to the Epstein case despite Epstein's attempt to revamp his reputation after his first stint in prison. The work of reporters and investigative journalists is still deeply, deeply important. But when a few moguls own all the major news networks and have close ties to Epstein or people who knew Epstein, and then pull shit like the recent mass firing at the Washington Post, for example, it's also entirely reasonable for the public to have little faith that these major news conglomerates would ever do anything to genuinely hold the powerful people accountable who sign their paychecks and exercise increasing editorial control over their publications. And then you have the promise of riches that potential virality offers on TikTok or YouTube or anywhere else at a time when the economy feels incredibly precarious. Cost of living is going up, job security is waning, and incomes have been stagnant for decades. And building a social media following by finding the most salacious things in the Epstein files with zero accountability to ethics or truth is pushing more and more people to spend hours and hours of their days poring over the millions of documents in the Epstein files to try to find something that will catch people's attention and get them the views and the revenue that comes with it. It's a perfect storm. On the flip side, reporters with smaller and smaller budgets and tighter deadlines often don't have the time or bandwidth to scour these documents for hours. And even if they do, traditional media often isn't as good at getting information to the people as content creators are. Similarly, our lawmakers and their aides don't have time to review 3 million documents. Last week, Representative Maxwell Frost posted a call on social media asking his followers to tell him which files he should review in their unredacted form, a privilege that Congress members have that they are increasingly exercising to get around the DOJ's haphazard redactions. So I'm not saying citizen vigilante sleuths are to be solely condemned. I think it's really important that everyday people are concerned with holding the government and the powerful people accountable. What I am saying is that the lack of transparency, the chaos of the release of these documents, combined with the lack of trust in our institutions and the proliferation of content that is based on conspiracy, lies, and AI-generated images and documents, is something that we should all be aware of as we navigate social media and consume content about Jeffrey Epstein or really anything online. And so I invite you to consume that content with a hint of skepticism, because the reality is that they are so convoluted and haphazardly redacted that it's hard to draw any concrete conclusions from the Epstein files as to specific crimes committed by specific people. There are certainly horrors contained in those files. There is certainly ample evidence connecting Epstein to his many crimes and victims. There's certainly extensive amounts of evidence that very powerful and influential people continued closely associating with him even after he was a convicted child sexual predator, evidence that has already led powerful people to step down from some of their positions of power. Britain's Lord Mendelsohn has said he will step down from the House of Lords and is under criminal investigation related to claims that he he passed insider information to Epstein, because of course we're going to charge the financial crimes before we charge the crimes against actual humans. Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary and former Harvard President Larry Summers resigned multiple posts, including his position on the advisory board of OpenAI. Brad Karp, the chairman of powerful law firm Paul Weiss, also resigned his role. But of course, these are people who have already made their fortunes, for whom stepping down from a role is symbolic more than anything. They've solidified their power and their networks, and they're willing to make this symbolic gesture in order to make all the bad PR go away. Because that's all this is to these people. That's all it was to Epstein too, as these emails reveal. Just some bad PR that can be made to go away. The overarching response from every single powerful person who appears repeatedly in these documents, who were clearly fraternizing with, chatting up, hanging out with, and doing business deals with a convicted child sexual predator after he had been convicted, and in some cases even after he was arrested in New York, long after it was apparently common public knowledge that Epstein likes them young, as Trump himself confirmed years ago. All these people who continued in his orbit after all of this, the common theme is denial. I didn't know. I didn't have anything to do with any of it. And even less believable, I was conned too. I mean, look at him. What a con man. He took advantage of my trust. How was I supposed to know? I'm just a baby. Les Wexner, founder of L Brands, parent company of retail stores targeted towards young girls such as The Limited 2, Victoria's Secret, Pink, Bath & Body Works, Abercrombie & Fitch, and more, claimed he had no idea and was just duped by Epstein, despite being so close that Epstein had power of attorney over Wexner's affairs. Noam Chomsky, the supposed genius, highly educated scholar of linguistics, also claims he's just a baby and was duped by Epstein's charms after numerous emails between the two of them surfaced, including one from 2019, where he laments to Epstein about the, quote, hysteria that has developed about abuse of women. He couldn't have known. How could he have known that this convicted child sex offender was bad? But the reality is that while this all looks really bad for the people who continue to be in contact with Epstein, so far, at least in the redacted files that have been reviewed thus far, there isn't smoking gun evidence of these powerful people committing crimes with Epstein. There are insinuations, there are innuendos, there's crass language and tasteless commentary, but the public seems to want accountability in the form of prosecutions in the court of law. And I think that expectation is misplaced, because laws and courts are not where you get accountability from powerful white men. Let's not forget who wrote these laws to begin with. I can confirm, as someone who has spent years studying these laws, who followed the book, got the law degree, studied for and passed the bar, worked in corporate law, this entire system is built to serve the interests of the so-called Epstein class. Civil rights laws have made inroads in various times throughout the centuries, but these laws to protect marginalized groups are band-aid afterthoughts meant to correct a system that is rotten through to its core by design. It's a system that perpetuates itself. This was apparent to me during law school, and especially when you study for the bar. The bar exam is the 2-day intensive test you take in order to get your license to practice law in a state. The subject matter on the bar exam makes it very clear what the powers that be want in the future lawyers of America. It's people who can protect the property and rights of the powerful. For example, here's what's on the multi-state bar exam, what you have to know about in order to become licensed to practice law. Business associations, agencies, partnerships, corporations, LLCs, contracts, including the Uniform Commercial Code, property law, trusts and estates, and a strangely large amount dedicated to secured transactions, which I still don't fucking understand despite passing the bar with flying colors, I might add. It's basically how businesses get loans for things, I think. There's also family law, where you learn how to protect the assets of the richer person during the divorce, criminal law, where you learn how much cops can get away with, torts, where you learn how hard it is to hold businesses accountable for hurting consumers, and then finally, constitutional law, which is where all the civil rights and other protections for marginalized people are shoved. The job of lawyers and accountants and all other service professions that align themselves with the elite is to protect the wealth and the rights of the wealthy. Period, full stop. If you want to do other work as a lawyer, like work protecting immigrants or civil rights or other things, you're either lauded as a saint who's willing to give up the prestige and money that should come with being a lawyer, or criticized for being a fool, going into nonprofit, or working a shit-paying public defender job while wearing an ill-fitting ugly suit. And the role of the Constitution is also to protect the rights of the white, landed, wealthy men who wrote the thing to begin with, and who based our system of laws off English common law, the very thing they were attempting to distance us from. We have spent the past 250 years of our country's history attempting to expand into a truly pluralistic democracy from a document that very intentionally excluded most of the populace. It's a system that is rotted from the ground up. And when you have that system of laws created to protect wealthy white people laid over top of a capitalist system that promotes and awards individualistic greed above all else, we're creating endless, ever-expanding shareholder value is the key component driving the entire economy, where the economic winners, the billionaires, are allowed to collude with the lawmakers and in some cases allowed to become the lawmakers, that is a recipe for disaster. Because if you have amassed a fortune of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in this capitalist society, it means you've exploited someone. It means you have in some way exploited other people in order to get where you are. You cannot amass that level of outsized wealth without paying your laborers less than the wealth they generate, thereby stealing their labor. You are comfortable with exploiting people, and you've likely convinced yourself you deserve your lot in life and they deserve theirs because of your family or your name or your race or religion or your willingness to just work hard and take risks. No one wants to work anymore. You have othered 99% of the population, which requires you to think of them as less human than you are. That is the obvious end state of unregulated capitalism. And when you have a bunch of oligarchs who think most people are less human than them and who are comfortable with exploiting people for their benefit, the Epstein class is the obvious end result. Because of course the people who would bear the brunt of the atrocities committed by the Epstein class are young girls, often in precarious economic and family situations. They picked the easiest target, the lowest hanging fruit, to get what they wanted. Or they looked the other way when the people around them did, because, well, those girls weren't really human anyway, and exploiting people isn't actually that bad so long as you get what you want. There is no level of accountability that these people will face because our laws are written to make that very difficult, and the system is perpetuated and upheld by the people who benefit from the permissive culture of looking the other way when crimes are committed, or openly embracing questionable behavior at best if it means staying in the social circle of the elite. We are not going to get Trump out of office and then elect a Democrat who'll swoop in and finally do the thorough investigating and prosecuting that people are hoping for. We had Democrats in office for 12 years since Epstein's original prosecution in the early 2000s. It's not Trump, it's not Republicans, it's the system. And it's not just in the US either. Epstein's class extends globally, as does the greed and the exploitation. Even in states in the US or in countries in Europe that are being lauded for being more left-leaning, even the well-meaning laws and initiatives meant to protect consumers or lower income people, those initiatives often fail to deliver on their promises, largely because the rich and powerful can find loopholes to undermine even the best intentions in this rotted system. One example is the proposed eviction moratorium here in Minneapolis to give renters some relief who have been unable to work due to the ongoing ICE surge here. A friend of mine who's privy to the discussions around the moratorium told me recently one concern that's been raised is that the moratorium could have the unintended negative consequence of landlords turning their tenants into ICE, who will come and deport them, which gets them out of the landlord's units so that they can then increase the rent and find renters who will pay. An example from Europe. In Ireland, there's a government initiative that offers a €30,000 grant to people who purchase and renovate a property that's been vacant for 2 years or more, in an effort to cut down on vacant housing and increase the badly needed housing stock, especially in Dublin. Seems great, right? But property owners trying to sell their vacant property then just increase the price of the property by €30,000 and advertise it as qualifying for the government grant. Now, I'm not arguing against an eviction moratorium in Minneapolis necessarily, or against laws to attempt to address housing shortages, but even the best laws attempting to right the wrongs of this system often have far-reaching and unintended consequences that should at least be discussed and considered, and that support my overall argument, which is that the system is fucking rotted through and through on a global scale, and that should fucking radicalize you. Okay, so what do we do about all this? Well, many scholars and philosophers have offered many different solutions to this rot for centuries, and I don't pretend to lay them all out here. I am, at my core, a pacifist and a nihilistic optimist. I'm not taking up arms or violently overthrowing a system, and history would suggest that trying to do that won't create the outcomes we necessarily want. I am also of the opinion that nothing really matters and we all die, so we might as well make the best of it while we're here. What this means for me in practice is that despite my literal job being paying close attention to the actions of politicians and the day-to-day functioning of government, as well as my deep interest in the law and in legal history, I have learned to put less weight on the ability of our lawmakers to save us, especially at the federal level. Especially my experience living in Minneapolis over the last 2 months, they're not going to save us. The system is set up so they won't. We save us. The solution isn't political overthrow and a complete change of the world order. The solution is that while it's important to push for laws and policy that help marginalized communities, you also kind of have to decenter the government from your life and your happiness and your well-being. Obviously, there are many ways that is impossible, especially if you are someone who depends on disability or social security payments to survive. I fully understand that. I see you. I'm just offering my pipe dream solution. This is why I'm such a huge advocate for getting out into your community, like your literal neighborhood, your street, and knowing your neighbors and participating in mutual aid. Mutual aid allows those with fewer resources and greater needs to decenter the government, even the slightest bit, if they know that they are members of a community that won't let them starve, that has their back. So first and foremost, is there a neighborhood association you can join? A local mutual aid group? An organization on your block you can get involved with? If not, can you start one? Secondly, stop giving away your time and your money and your data to these fucking oligarchs. I know I say this as someone who makes a living from you staying here and watching my videos, and for that I'm eternally grateful and humbled, but like, if you're on Twitter still, maybe don't be. If you subscribe to Amazon Prime, maybe stop. You can go to resistandunsubscribe.com for some quick and easy ways to divest from these fucking creeps. Additionally, I would suggest trying to deconstruct the especially very American tendency to hero worship the rich and famous. Taylor Swift is a fucking billionaire. Ew, so is Beyonce. A ton of people thought Elon Musk was some gifted, if eccentric, genius until he started literally dismantling the federal government and doing Nazi salutes. Don't hero worship billionaires. Don't hero worship politicians. Get off social media. Pay attention to what you actually have agency and control over in your life, which is likely mostly your immediate relationships, how you spend your money and your time, and maybe your local leaders, whether that's business leaders or city council leaders or school board leaders or whomstever. Do what you can on a hyper-local level to take care of yourself and the people around you, and trust that those connections and that care that you give will come back around when you need it too. They are not coming to save us. Not the DOJ, not the FBI, not the Democrats, not some revolutionary and a cute little cat. We save us. So start acting accordingly. If you'd like to support my work, consider joining on YouTube, Substack, or Patreon to get access to all these episodes completely ad-free. Also, if you like my Reagan Ruined Everything t-shirt, you can get one for yourself at 𝗬𝗓𝗪merch.com. And thank you to my multi-platinum patrons Christopher Cohen, Evan Friedley, Mark, Sarah Shelby, Dennis Smith, Art, David, Latranger Lucas, Thomas Johnson, and Tay. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you like this episode, you'll like my episode from Monday about Trump's latest attempts to prosecute protesters for domestic terrorism. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye!